I came to Seattle in the fall when I was 23, carrying one old suitcase and a naive belief that I could make something of myself in a city everyone called the heart of tech. I had no idea I would stay with Nova Pulse for 7 years, and I had no idea loyalty could crack open in a single moment of truth. I still remember my first day at Nova Pulse. We met in a converted garage, the floor still smelling like fresh paint, the servers humming in the corner like a broken refrigerator. Back then, we were just 10 people, young and full of fire, convinced we were building something different. I believed it too. I stayed up most nights in those early weeks, writing technical notes on a wobbly wooden table, eating cold pizza, and sleeping on a sofa, too short for someone 5'6". But somehow it all felt worth it. We talked about the future like it was already in our hands. 7 years later, Nova Pulse sat inside a sleek glass building in downtown Seattle with 3 full floors, a rec room, a nap room, a small gym, and more than 300 employees, from a garage to a multi-million-dollar company. From messy early code to a product used by dozens of clients. And I grew with it, becoming the person every new engineering team needed if they wanted to understand how the system was actually built. I wrote almost all of the company's internal documentation, the playbooks, the training guides, the operational procedures, the product troubleshooting steps, all created in those early days when I thought I was just helping the team. Only later did I realize those documents had become the backbone that the entire company relied on. But there was one thing I never managed to build: balance for myself. In 7 years, I missed too much. My mom's birthday has been celebrated 3 years in a row. My sister's anniversary trip, a 3-year relationship that slipped away because I was too busy to care. I kept telling myself it was fine, that once the company grew, once I finally got promoted, all this sacrifice would be worth it. But I was never promoted. My raises crawled so slowly that every paycheck felt like falling behind in a city as expensive as Seattle. My rent went up every year. My salary stayed the same for 4 straight years. I used to think maybe everyone else was dealing with the same thing. Until the new hires showed up. They were a few years younger, fresh out of big-name universities, carrying the bright confidence only people who have never lived through a startup's survival night seem to have. They got brand new laptops, top-tier ergonomic chairs, company-paid tech conferences, and even tuition support. Things we used to hope for but never received. I told myself it was normal. The company was bigger. Priorities had shifted. I tried not to dwell on it. Then one day, with one accidental click, everything changed. It was a Wednesday. I was checking emails like usual when something strange appeared in my inbox. An internal message from HR was sent to the wrong person, marked in bright red. My instinct was to delete it immediately, but the subject line froze me. It was a salary proposal for a new hire. I hesitated, reminded myself I should not open it. But 1 second was enough. I clicked, and it felt like someone had dropped a bucket of ice into my chest. The new hire's starting salary was 50% higher than mine, and the only thing they had contributed so far was a technical test on interview day. I stared at the screen, my hands went cold, my whole body froze. The documents I wrote, the nights I stayed up until 3 in the morning, the shifts I covered for teammates with sick kids, the dawn hour system failures I patched, so clients never knew the company almost collapsed. All of it suddenly shrank into a number painfully small next to someone who had just walked in. I closed the email, opened it again, typed the salary into a calculator to make sure I was not misreading anything. But there was no mistake. The truth sat there, sharp and clean like a cut straight through my pride. I sat in an empty meeting room for nearly half an hour trying to steady myself, but my heartbeat would not calm. That evening, I went home earlier than usual and sat alone in my small apartment, staring at the glowing buildings of downtown Seattle. I wondered how naive I had been to believe the company would naturally value what I built. Loyalty stretches like a tight wire over time, and in that moment, I felt it start to split, strand by strand. Sometimes I wonder if anyone listening to my story has felt that moment. The moment 7 years of effort tilt off balance because of one truth you were never meant to see. If you are still here with me, I want to know where you are listening from. Leave a comment. And if you are drawn to stories about standing up and reclaiming your worth, stay with me. because what happened next shocked me even more than that first hit. My story does not end here. I spent the entire evening trying to calm myself, but my mind kept spinning around the number in that email. I could not make sense of it. Someone fresh out of school, someone who had not even completed one quarter of work, was earning 1.5 times my salary. It was not jealousy. It was the kind of dismissal so sharp that I could not put it into words. I tried to defend the company in my head, telling myself the market had changed, that new hires might bring fresh perspectives. But for 7 years, what had I done besides constantly updating my skills, taking night classes, earning certification after certification, just to make sure I did not fall behind? I did everything I could to be worthy of my role, and none of it showed up in any number that mattered. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The lights above cast a cold glow across the wide space. Everything looked far nicer than that old garage, yet somehow I felt more out of place than ever. I sat down, touched my familiar laptop, and tried to work as if nothing had happened, but it felt like someone had set a stone on my chest. Around 10, I opened my calendar and booked a meeting with Madison. No explanation, just one line. I need to discuss an important matter. I had no idea where the courage came from, but I knew one thing. If I stayed silent now, I would stay silent forever. Madison replied quickly. Within 1 minute, a notification popped up confirming a 2 o'clock meeting. That alone made my nerves tighten. Her schedule was usually packed. The fact that she responded that fast meant she knew this conversation was coming. When the two arrived, I walked into her office. It was spacious, bright, with a clear view of downtown Seattle, a world away from the cramped desk where I spent my first 5 years. Madison sat there, confident and sharp, the kind of leader used to making large decisions. I used to admire her. But today, I could not see her the same way. I sat down across from her. She offered a small, polite smile, the kind I rarely saw during those gritty early startup years. She asked what I wanted to discuss. I did not ease into it. I opened my laptop, pulled up the new higher salary email, and turned the screen toward her. She glanced at it, then nodded, like she already knew exactly what I would ask. I asked why that salary was so much higher than mine. A short silence stretched for a few seconds before she answered in a calm, steady tone. She talked about market shifts, competition for young talent, and updated salary bands for new positions. All the rational reasons that sounded acceptable to anyone who had not lived through 7 years of stagnant raises. But what struck me hardest was not the explanation. It was the sentence she delivered right after. Lena is loyal. I know you will not leave the company. That sentence cut deeper than the salary gap ever could. It was not a compliment, not gratitude. It was the bare truth about how she saw me. As an old pillar expected to stand still, endure, hold everything together without asking for anything in return, something the company could lean on without ever investing in again. I took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. I asked directly if my salary could be adjusted. Madison looked at me and gave a small shake of her head. She said my role was stable, the budget was set, and the company's financial focus was on expansion. None of it surprised me, but hearing it spoken aloud hurt more than I expected. I sat in silence for a few seconds. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to stand up and walk out, but I forced myself to stay long enough to regain control. I thanked her for her honesty and left the room. And the moment the glass door closed behind me, it felt like I had left 7 years of loyalty lying on the floor. That afternoon, I could barely work. Every time I looked at one of the documents I had written, a dull ache spread across my chest. 7 years of effort, reduced to one sentence that treated me like someone incapable of leaving. I wondered if I had been asking for too much, or if I had simply been used. The two thoughts pulled me apart the entire day. That night, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, one hand on my chest to steady my breathing. I thought about next month's rent, my tiny savings, the risk of switching jobs in a volatile tech industry. Madison's words. I could not sleep. I tossed and turned for hours. And for the first time in 7 years, I questioned everything I had given Nova Pulse. And somewhere in the silence of that small apartment, I felt something shift inside me. A change not fully shaped yet, but strong enough to tell me I would never accept things the same way again. After a nearly sleepless night, I arrived at the office an hour earlier than usual. The moment I stepped out of the elevator, the entire floor was so quiet I could hear my footsteps echoing across the tiles. I powered on my computer and tried to do a few tasks to clear my mind, but Madison's words kept circling in my head. They felt like a shadow following everything I looked at. I was about to open the product strategy document when a notification popped up saying my storage was almost full. A window suggested I delete or move old files. I clicked into the list of long-term archives, mostly technical documents and auto-saved emails from past internal audits. I scrolled without thinking, just wanting to free up space. But as I continued down the list, one attachment caught my eye. Its title read, Internal Compensation Audit Quarter 2, Restricted. I remembered receiving that email 3 years ago, during a massive data audit before our first funding round. Back then, dozens of emails went out and came back. Files were flying everywhere, and I had no time to open everything. I must have saved this one without reading it. I opened the file, and within seconds, my hands went cold the way they had when I saw the salary email the day before. On the very first page, the audit objective stated, evaluate internal payouts to optimize workforce costs and increase projected profits. That sounded standard. But when I scrolled to the internal notes, I saw one unfamiliar term repeated over and over, LCP. I opened the glossary, and the moment my eyes hit the definition, my heart stalled. LCP, Loyal Cost Program, a cost optimization program based on internal loyalty. Employees with more than 3 years of tenure and a low turnover risk would be held at restricted salary levels to reduce overall labor costs. The recommended maximum raise was 2% per year. I read it again to make sure I was not misunderstanding anything. But there was nothing to misinterpret. It was deliberate, a policy designed and approved by leadership, backed by people I once trusted, including Madison. My hand trembled as I scrolled down. There was a list of employees labeled low turnover risk. My name was there. So was Alex from engineering, the one who stayed in the office for 3 straight days to save a project. So was Maria from customer support, who never refused a single night shift. The people who had held Novapulse together since the early days. The people I always believed were the company's backbone. Turns out we were all seen the same way. Easy to keep, unlikely to leave, safe to underpay. I leaned back in my chair, my head falling against the headrest. It felt like someone had taken all 7 years of my life and pinned them to a scale before pressing down with something cruel and heavy. I remembered every moment I had once been proud of, the adrenaline-filled nights, the endless meetings, the exhausted tears shed while racing to hit a deadline. Madison once told me I was a partner from the very beginning. She once placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "We made it because we had each other." But behind my back, I was nothing more than a cost to be optimized. A strange ache spread from my chest into my stomach. Not anger, not sadness, a deeper kind of betrayal. I opened the window and looked out at Seattle waking up outside, and one thought struck me so hard I froze. If I had not opened that old email by accident, I would have spent the rest of my career believing my lack of progress was my fault. I would have pushed myself harder, blamed myself more, all while the company had decided to hold me down long ago. I picked up my phone and called my closest friend, Haley, now the head of HR at a major tech company in San Francisco. She answered after 2 rings. Her voice was groggy from the time difference, but she snapped fully awake the moment she heard what I found. I read her the description of LCP and asked if this was normal in HR. Haley let out a long exhale, heavy enough that I could feel it through the phone. She told me plainly that a policy like this was a serious breach of professional ethics. It might not break specific laws if a company were skilled at hiding it, but if exposed, the legal and reputational risks would be enormous. Intentionally suppressing wages for loyal employees without performance-based or transparent standards was condemned in the HR world. Haley said that in San Francisco, if this came to light, the company could be investigated. Hearing that hit me with a mix of validation and pain. It was not that I lacked skill, not that I lacked value. I had been held down, on purpose, systematically. I hung up and looked back at the laptop screen. The audit report was still open, the words sharp and undeniable. LCP, Loyal Cost Program, a program that rewarded loyalty by exploiting it. I closed the laptop. In that moment, a strange stillness washed over me. No more confusion, no more excuses on the company's behalf. Only one truth. I could not let this end here. I had to dig deeper, not just for myself, but for everyone whose name appeared on that list, and for everyone who might be added to it someday if no one ever speaks up. From the moment I discovered the LCP program, my mind felt stretched like a tightened string. I tried to work as usual, but every document I opened made me think about the dozens of people being held below market pay simply because they were loyal. I could not ignore it, but I also could not act recklessly. If I wanted the truth, I needed real data. And the only person with deep system access whom I trusted was Evan. Evan was the IT manager, the one who had helped me patch critical bugs during those long nights. Quiet, steady, always fair. I messaged him, "Meet me on the rooftop when you are free." He replied instantly, "5 minutes." I told Evan everything, from the new hire salary email to the LCP report I had just uncovered. He listened without changing expression, but his eyes were tense. When I finished, Evan said only one thing. "You know how sensitive salary data is. If they think you accessed anything without clearance, they could fire you the same day." I knew. I had lost sleep over it. But I had no way back. I said, "I do not need individual salary details. I just want to know the scale of it. If it is only happening to me, that is one thing. But if it is systemic," Evan cut in. "I understand." He stood still for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "I can run a system integrity report. Not for you. For me. Internal housekeeping. If the report happens to show up in a temporary folder and someone sees it before I delete it, that is not my fault." I looked at him, knowing exactly how much he was risking. I nodded. "Thank you." That afternoon, when I returned to my desk, a message popped up in the internal chat. The sender surprised me. Toby, one of the new hires barely a month in. His message was short. "You should look at this. This is not right." Attached was a screenshot of a permissions panel. At the bottom was a note. "Apply LCP rules to legacy employees only." Legacy employees. The early ones. People like me. I had no idea why Toby had access to that view, but the fact he sent it at all told me he sensed something wrong. I sent a brief thank you. He did not reply, probably trying not to draw attention. Later that afternoon, a system alert flashed, saying there was an unusual query in the payroll database. Minutes later, Madison appeared in the IT area, clearly irritated. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding. She questioned the team, demanded they trace the queries and identify the source. Thankfully, Evan was not the one running it. The query seemed to have come from an old bot that had reactivated, but the way Madison narrowed her eyes told me she had caught the scent of something. After she left, I found Evan. He assured me he had not run anything yet, but when he did, it would be over the weekend when no one was watching. I agreed. It was our only chance. Saturday passed in a haze of anxiety. Every time my phone lit up, I jumped. Near noon on Sunday, while I was making coffee, a message from Evan arrived. "Afternoon. In person. Do not open the file over the network. We met at a cafe near Green Lake." Evan brought his personal laptop, sat down, and turned the screen toward me. The report opened. The first lines tightened my chest. More than 40 employees were in the suppressed pay group. Average underpayment is between 30 and 40% below the market. In some cases, nearly 50%. New hires, meanwhile, were paid on the newest salary bands, far above us. LCP was not a trial idea. It had been quietly implemented for years, through multiple review cycles. I saw Alex's name, the one who stayed 3 days straight to save a project. Maria's name, the one who never missed a customer shift. Familiar names from the earliest battles we fought together. All are labeled low turnover risk. All were placed in the suppressed pay group. I sat frozen. A cold wave crawled from the base of my neck down my spine. This was no longer a surprise. It was pure pain. The pain of realizing that the company I once called family had reduced us to optimize figures, to spare costs on a spreadsheet. I closed the laptop. In my mind, every last doubt vanished. The truth was laid bare, unmistakable and unforgivable. Evan looked at me and asked softly, "What are you going to do?" I answered without even thinking, "I am not staying silent anymore." I woke up on Monday earlier than usual, but not because of the anxiety that had followed me the past few days. This time, it was because I had made a decision, one that could not be undone. After Evan handed me the report over the weekend, I spent the entire night reading every line, every chart, every piece of evidence showing how Nova Pulse had turned loyalty into a cost-saving tool. Not just for me, but for everyone who had built this place from the ground up. When I finally closed my laptop, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I stayed silent, I would be complicit. I arrived at the office while the morning fog was still hanging over the city. The security guard greeted me like any other day, unaware that a few hours later, the entire company would be shaken. I walked up to the third floor, where Madison's office overlooked the lake. The door was unlocked. The earliest to arrive besides the guard was always me or her. I pushed the door open quietly and stepped in. The office was as neat and polished as always. I pulled her chair out and placed a thick envelope on it. Inside were three things: my resignation letter, a copy of the LCP report Evan generated, and the internal email from 3 years ago where leadership discussed keeping loyal employees at minimum pay. I positioned the envelope so she would see it the moment she sat down. Then I left the room, closing the door softly behind me, as if giving her a final moment of calm before the storm hit. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop. I had written this email the night before, editing it dozens of times to make sure not a single word was misplaced. I read it one last time. To all employees who have been with Nova Pulse for more than 2 years, this is the truth behind why our salaries have been suppressed, why new hires are paid far more, and why our value has never been recognized appropriately. This is data, not speculation. Read it and decide for yourselves. I attached the LCP report, the audit files, and Toby's system note. I took a deep breath and hit send. It only took 3 seconds for the email to go out, but to me, it felt like an entire lifetime. Within 5 minutes, the office began to stir. First whispers, then the chairs scraped back, then urgent voices and fast footsteps across the hallway. Longtime employees stared at their screens in disbelief before anger took over. Some stood up and pointed at their monitors, saying things like, "I knew it. I suspected this." A few younger employees sat silently, confusion spreading across their faces. They realized they had been paid more not because they were more capable, but because they were tools to keep the rest of us suppressed. Some of the newest hires even flushed with embarrassment, realizing they were unintentionally part of something deeply unfair. Within 10 minutes, I saw my email open on screens all across the floor. People were forwarding it, gathering around desks, asking each other, "Is this real? How long has this been happening? Who knew?" I sat still, watching it all unfold. No fear, no regret. My phone buzzed. Madison. Her name lit up the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then finally picked up. Her voice was cold enough to cut through steel. "Lena, what did you just do?" I said. "I shared the truth with the people who deserve to know it." Madison snapped. "Do you understand how many confidentiality rules you just violated? Do you have any idea I could sue you for internal data theft?" I stayed calm. I did not steal anything. These files have always existed in the system with valid timestamps and access trails, and if necessary, I am prepared to hand every log over to the United States Department of Labor. There was a pause, a sharp one. Clearly, Madison had not expected me to push back so quickly. She shifted her tone, softer but laced with anger. "The email you found was only an internal evaluation. Misinterpreted. It is not official policy. You have created a serious misunderstanding." I let out a quiet laugh. If it were only a misunderstanding, why do the numbers show the same pattern year after year? And why hide the LCP list in a restricted permission group? Madison, if you want to deny it, you will need something far better than that. She raised her voice. "You are causing chaos. You think you are helping anyone. You are only making things worse." I looked out at the floor where dozens of employees were gathered, voices filled with outrage. This chaos, I said, should have happened a long time ago. Just as I was about to end the call, a new message came in. Toby. I opened it. It was a link to an internal thread. When I clicked it, my breath caught. It was a conversation in the finance Slack channel where a manager discussed the benefits of maintaining LCP, including their prediction that we were unlikely to revolt because we were too attached to the company. I forwarded the link directly into the ongoing call and said, Madison, would you like me to send this to everyone too? Madison went silent. I could hear her breathing heavier, whether from anger or fear, I could not tell. Finally, she said through clenched teeth, You have no idea what you are putting yourself into, I replied softly. No, it is you who does not understand what Nova Pulse is about to walk into. Then I hung up. Inside the office, the air felt like the moment before a storm breaks. But one thing was unmistakable. No one looked at me the same way anymore. Not with pity, not with hesitation, but with gratitude mixed with readiness to rise. That day, the entire foundation of Nova Pulse began to shake. And for the first time, Madison understood this was not something she could bury quietly. After my email, Nova Pulse spun like a tornado. But I knew Madison was not the kind of leader who let any storm shake her that easily. She thrived on control and authority, and when threatened, she fought back. I was not surprised when the next morning, while the entire company was still buzzing with outrage, I received a message from Toby. You need to hear this. Attached was an audio file. I hesitated for a moment before pressing play. It was a recording from an emergency meeting between Madison and the executive team, captured in the 8th floor conference room. Madison's voice came through sharp and colder than usual. We need to rewrite the narrative. Everyone must agree that this was the CFO's error in analysis. Just a mistimed evaluation that was never implemented. The CFO sounded strained. Madison, you know that is not true. Madison answered instantly, without a breath of pause. Truth is not the issue. We need what is acceptable. My hands tightened. She was already looking for someone to throw under the bus, not to fix anything, to survive. Toby sent another message. Be careful. She is moving fast. I exhaled slowly. I knew Madison would not surrender. I also knew she would come for me sooner rather than later. Right on cue, around noon, Madison asked to meet me at a small cafe tucked behind the building across the street. A quiet place. Not somewhere anyone from the company usually went. When I stepped inside, she was already in the back corner, a cup of coffee in front of her, untouched. She watched me sit down, eyes cold but always calculating. Lena, she began, we can resolve this in a civilized way. I said nothing, waiting. Madison leaned forward, lowering her voice. You are putting the entire company at risk, but if you want to leave gracefully, I can arrange it. A significant severance. 6 months of pay. You sign an NDA and this ends. I glanced at her coffee cup. Calm. No. Madison raised an eyebrow, not surprised, but clearly annoyed. Fine. Then a new position. Senior Product Director. Your own office. A substantial raise. You step away from all of this. A small laugh escaped me before I could stop it. A big title with no power, right? Madison did not reply. The way she tightened her grip on the cup was answer enough. I met her eyes. Madison, I do not want hush money. I do not want a title. I want justice. And I brought the Fair Compensation Reform Plan. Madison froze. The what? I took out the document I had prepared the night before and set it on the table. Adjust all salaries to the market. Provide back pay for affected employees. Make the compensation structure transparent, along with promotion criteria. And temporarily redirect 2/4 of leadership bonuses to fund the corrections. Madison stared at me like I had proposed setting the company on fire. Lena, you are out of your mind. The company would run out of money immediately. I shook my head. No. I ran the numbers. The back pay cost is less than 2% of the investment fund from the last round, and transparency will actually improve the next funding round because investors will see we are reducing turnover risk. Madison smirked. You think investors care about culture? Yes. When bad culture destroys performance and drives talent away. I opened to the final page and pushed it toward her. And here is the predictive model I ran. If the company continues suppressing pay for long-term employees, in 2 years the cumulative attrition rate will exceed 45%. That is what investors fear. Madison said nothing. For the first time since I met her, I saw real hesitation. Not performance, not a strategy. Fear of losing the power she had built through years of manipulation. She leaned back in her chair. If I refuse, I answered instantly, calm and sharp. Tomorrow, I will send all the data, the meeting recording, and the internal discussions to the United States Department of Labor and to the company's lead investor. Madison narrowed her eyes. You think they will listen to you? I think they will listen to data and to employees, something you have forgotten. The air between us tightened like a wire pulled to the edge of snapping. For a moment, I thought Madison would lash out again, but instead, she said, I need time to review this. I stood. You have 2 days. As I stepped out of the cafe, I had no idea which way Madison would turn. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She no longer held the upper hand. For the first time, she was the one backed into a corner. And I was no longer the person who bowed to pressure. 2 days after the cafe meeting, Nova Pulse no longer felt like the Nova Pulse I once knew. The familiar office space was now filled with tense conversations, conference room doors slamming shut, and glances loaded with suspicion. Internal messages were exploding nonstop. The veterans were furious. The newcomers were unsettled. And at the center of the chaos, Madison looked more unstable than ever. The board moved faster than I expected. Just one day after receiving the data I sent to Noah Briggs, the COO, and the one person I quietly trusted, an emergency meeting was called. I was not allowed to attend, but Toby, who somehow managed to track the meeting schedule, fed me updates piece by piece. Inside that room, Madison tried to defend herself. She repeated the same tired line. This was just an internal audit taken out of context. But this time, no one was buying it. The salary charts, the recordings, the LCP emails, and Evan's statistical reports all pointed to one thing. The wage gap was not an accident. It was a strategy. Several board members questioned Madison directly about the low turnover risk category and why it had been used as justification to suppress salaries for long-term employees. Madison avoided their eyes and rambled through excuses with no substance. She even attempted to shift all blame to the CFO, claiming the finance department had misinterpreted her direction. But the CFO came prepared. He produced an email clearly showing Madison was the one who proposed the model. In an instant, the tone of the room shifted. That afternoon, one by one, longtime employees I had worked beside began leaving the company. Some handed in formal resignations. Some wrote short, heartbreaking goodbye emails. A few simply placed their name badges on their desks and walked out without looking back. Alex, the one who spent 3 sleepless days with me saving a project, sent me a message. Thank you, Lena. But I cannot stay here another minute. Each resignation hit leadership like a crashing wave. And when the number reached a crisis point, the company's largest investor flew from New York to Seattle on the next flight. The meeting lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the decision was clear. Either Madison stepped down or the funding would be pulled. Under that pressure, Madison had no options left. She was forced to resign that same afternoon. No farewell gathering, no polished announcement, just a dry system message. Effective immediately, Madison Clark will step down from her role as Chief Executive Officer. I read it with a complicated mix of emotions. Not joy, not vengeance, just a strange, quiet hollow. For years, Madison was someone I trusted, feared, admired, and resented all at once. Watching her fall like this made me realize something. The downfall of a person does not look like fireworks. It is silent. Moments after Madison left the building, the board announced the interim CEO, Noah Briggs, steady, experienced, and respected by most of the staff. When the news spread, the heavy air in the office softened a little, not because everything was fixed, but because at least someone trustworthy was finally at the helm. On the day Noah officially took over, the company called an all-hands meeting. Every employee was packed into the large auditorium. I sat in the back row, not wanting attention. Noah walked onto the stage to the low hum of a room full of restless people. He began his speech by openly addressing the failures of the previous leadership. something no CEO at Novapulse had ever done. Then he presented the new transparency plan, including market level salary adjustments and a clear promotion system. What surprised me was when he paused for a moment and said, "We have these insights because someone had the courage to speak up. I will not name them, but Novapulse owes them a deep gratitude. No one turned to look at me, but I felt the weight of many eyes filled with appreciation, not scrutiny." After the meeting, Noah called me into his office. He sat across from me with a calm that felt miles different from Madison's. "Lena, I want to offer you your position back, but this time with compensation that matches your true value. Higher, actually." I looked at him, conflicted. Part of me respected that offer. It came from someone who understood fairness. But another part of me no longer belonged here. I answered gently, "Noah, thank you, truly. But I think it is time for me to move on." He nodded without arguing, without pressure. "You can leave with your head held high, and Nova Pulse will keep the good changes you sparked." I walked out of his office and down the hallway where I had spent 7 years of my life. There was a thin ache in my chest, but not the crushing kind. I knew I had done the right thing, and this company, even if it was no longer mine, would be better because of what happened. Leaving Nova Pulse, I thought I would feel hollow. 7 years is long enough to carve itself into your identity. But the next morning, when I opened my eyes without jolting awake to worry about backlog, weekly reports, or a 6 a.m. email from Madison, I realized I was breathing in a way I had not felt in years, as if someone had lifted a weight off my shoulders that I once believed I was meant to carry. I spent 3 weeks resting, visiting places around Seattle I had never had the time to see. I woke up late, walked along the edge of Green Lake, and read books in quiet cafes on Capitol Hill. Sometimes I looked at my closed laptop and wondered how I had let myself drown so deeply in the grind that I forgot what it felt like to truly slow down. On the 20th day of my break, I got a call from a software company in Portland, an old partner who knew me from joint projects with NovaPulse. They invited me to interview for the role of Director of Product Strategy. After just 2 rounds, they offered me a salary nearly 70% higher than my previous one. I looked at the number, and a tightness rose in my chest, not from the money, but from finally feeling valued after years of doubting myself. Everything at the new company felt different. They respected each other's time. No pointless late afternoon meetings, no midnight emails. During my first week, the COO told me, "Here, Lena, we believe high performance comes from transparency and fairness, not blind sacrifice." I left that meeting feeling something unfamiliar: freedom. As time passed, I stopped carrying the pain of what happened at Nova Pulse, but the story stayed with me. Many nights I thought about people like me, people whose loyalty had been used against them, who had been kept underpaid, who never realized they deserved so much more. One day I attended a conference on workplace equity in San Diego, just as a regular participant. I had no idea my story would catch the attention of the organizers. During an open discussion, I shared a short version of my experience at Nova Pulse, and the room went completely silent. When I finished, a middle-aged woman wearing a badge that read HR Consultant, New York, approached me and said, "Have you ever considered speaking publicly? What you shared is something many employees need to hear." From that moment, everything spread faster than I expected. HR organizations across the United States began sending me emails, inviting me to speak about pay transparency, corporate ethics, and fair workplace culture. My surprise slowly shifted into realization. My story was not just a personal wound, it was a mirror reflecting what was happening at countless companies. I decided to build a small online forum, simply to share knowledge and help employees recognize signs of underpayment or discriminatory compensation. At first, it was only a few dozen people, then a few hundred, and in less than 6 months, it grew to more than 1,000. They shared their stories. I shared what I had learned. The forum became a real community, a place where people found their voices. One person wrote, "I read your post and realized my company was running the exact same model as LCP. I resigned and just got a salary 40% higher. Thank you," another wrote. "Lena, you do not know this, but you changed my life." I read those messages on a peaceful evening in my new apartment, a place brighter, bigger, and free of the emotional debt my old one carried. I stared at my screen, feeling warmth spread through me, like a small flame growing stronger. On a crisp morning in early October, I received an email from a national program in Washington, D.C., a gathering of HR and tech ethics leaders from across the country. They invited me as a keynote speaker for their conference on pay transparency and corporate ethics. I read the email 3 times before I believed it. An employee suppressed by loyalty based policies, underestimated, and underpaid. I had become someone helping others fight against those very systems. One Saturday afternoon, while preparing my keynote speech, I received a handwritten letter at my new company's mailing address. The sender was Maria, my former colleague at Nova Pulse. The letter was short, but I read it over and over. Lena, today I received my adjusted salary. When I saw the number, I cried. I know this started because of you. Thank you for speaking up when we could not. I folded the letter and pressed my hand to my chest, not to steady my heartbeat, but to hold the moment. The moment I understood that what I had done was not just to free myself, but to open a door for so many others. I used to think my journey ended when I left Nova Pulse, but it turns out that was only the beginning. Now I am stepping into a different world, one where my voice is no longer silenced, one where I can help others see their worth before anyone tries to twist it. I smiled, opened my laptop, and continued writing the keynote. The first sentence I typed was, "Fairness is not a dream, it is a standard, and we deserve to work in places that honor that standard." 1 year after leaving Nova Pulse, I returned to Seattle on a strangely clear morning. Not to go back to the company, but to attend a salary transparency conference they were sponsoring. That alone surprised me. Only a year earlier, the place had been buried under the fog of secrecy Madison created. Now, Nova Pulse was completely different. Under the leadership of Noah Briggs, the company carried out the entire fair compensation reform plan I once proposed and expanded it even further. Salary transparency was published on the intranet. Every role had a clear market benchmark. Performance reviews were done through 2 sources, peers and managers, eliminating personal bias. And they created an internal fairness council, an independent employee group, with authority to review any unusual HR decision. Those reforms turned Nova Pulse into a case study plastered across articles on American corporate culture. One major magazine ran the headline, Nova Pulse, From Ethical Crisis to a Model of Pay Transparency. I read the article and smiled, not because my contribution was mentioned. It was not, but because the right thing had finally won. While Nova Pulse rebuilt itself, Madison was not as fortunate. She launched a new startup in HR analytics and named it Clarity Works, an irony that nearly made me laugh. But in tech, bad news travels faster than good. A former employee posted a long message on LinkedIn saying she had been a victim of LCP under Madison and warning people to stay away. The post spread to thousands. When I read it, I froze for a second. Not from revenge, but from recognizing a twist I never expected. The broken culture Madison planted at Nova Pulse had followed her wherever she tried to restart. The warning spread so far that applicants withdrew the same day they applied. 6 months later, Clarity Works shut down because no one would work there. No one celebrated. It was simply the truth. You cannot build a future on a lack of transparency. A few weeks later, Noah sent me an email, still calm and polite, but with something different in the tone, as if he was letting a part of himself show. Lena, I want to share the board's final report on last year's crisis. There is a line in it that says, because of the actions of one employee, the company narrowly avoided a silent collapse. Thank you for doing what no one else dared to do. Noah. I sat in my quiet living room, staring at the words silent collapse, and understood something. If I had not sent that email, Nova Pulse might still exist, but it would be a hollow company rotting from the inside. I wrote back a short message. I only did what was right. That evening, I opened my laptop and continued the project I had worked on for months. My first book. It was not a memoir. It was a guide for every employee, every manager, every company that wanted to build a fair and transparent workplace. I spent the whole summer writing it, editing it, and then sending it to a major publisher. 3 months later, I held the finished book in my hands. The first page read, "For the ones who stayed silent because they believed their voice was too small." I thought of myself 3 years earlier, silent in the same way. When the book launched, messages from across the country poured in. An employee in Chicago wrote, "Because of your book, I discovered my company had been underpaying women for years." A software engineer in Texas said, "I brought your chapter on loyalty based suppression into my salary review. The result: I just got a raise of 22%. I never knew how to respond with anything more than 2 words. Keep going." In December, I was invited as the keynote speaker for the American Corporate Fairness Summit, the largest national event on business ethics and workplace culture. They expected more than 5,000 attendees, from CEOs and HR directors to newcomers still trying to understand what real fairness looks like. When I stepped into the backstage area, the noise from the massive hall rolled in like waves. I stood behind the black curtain, my hand resting on my small notebook. I did not need it, but it reminded me of the journey that brought me here. From a small office in a garage born startup, to the night I sat alone reading the LCP file in despair, to the email that shook an entire company, to the conferences, the forums, and the people whose lives changed when the truth finally surfaced. The event coordinator walked over and smiled. "Lena, it is time. They are all waiting for you." I took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. Light flooded over me. Thousands of faces looked up, not with curiosity, but with hope. Hope that what I would say might help them reclaim fairness in their own lives. I stood before the microphone, my heart steady in a way I had not expected. Then I spoke the first line, the one I had carried with me for more than a year. When the truth is spoken, it does not free just one person. It frees an entire generation. In that moment, I knew my story had ended, but my mission had only just begun.